Thank you. All right. Um, First, let me start by just saying I am really thrilled to be here. Very excited to be able to speak to you guys. It's been 17 years since my last sermon I gave. And I am 51, just turned 51 3 weeks ago, so a third of my life ago. A third of my life. It's kind of hard to register in my brain. A third of my life ago was the last sermon I gave. Strangely enough, also, I became a Christian when I was 17. So right now I can divide my life up into these three 17-year periods of 17 years as not a Christian, and then my 17 kind of years of full-time ministry and part-time ministry, and then 17 years with a second career that I've been doing. So, but it's great to be here. My history, I became a Christian when I was 17 years old in 1977, and then I went off to Oregon State University, and eventually got involved in a ministry called Young Life, where I don't know if anybody's ever heard of Young Life here, but it's a Christian outreach to unchurched, unsaved kids. And I did that for about 10 years, and then the last 2 years of my full-time ministry days, I worked at a church. So I was there for 2 years working as a youth pastor and the assistant pastor, but the last 7 months of it, the senior pastor resigned. And I was there by myself, the only pastor, completely unexpected to be in that position, the last 7 months of that time period. So what we're going through right now seems familiar to me, this time of not having a senior pastor and the dynamics in the church, the excitement, the anticipation, the fears, the anxiety, all those kind of things going on that I hear about. One of the things I wanted to say is that there is a tremendous opportunity in a time like this where, you know, when we've had a leader like Dave, a strong leader up front, we can kind of just rely on him for a lot of things. And now we're going to have to do two things differently. We're going to have to rely on God more, and we're going to have to look to each other differently. I've talked about this in the family circus class that I teach, the Sunday school class, and it's already happened to us that we are looking at each other differently, and we're coming together differently than we did. I think we mean more to each other than beforehand. So I hope the same thing is happening for you, and that as we kind of the need to grow causes us to actually grow in our involvement with the church. So I hope that happens. Some of you know I'm a psychologist. That's where the doctor part comes from that he introduced me as. I got my degrees, my master's and doctorate in psychology at George Fox University, way over in Oregon, the other corner of the country. And it was a Christian psychology program where we integrated Christianity with psychology and really tried to find a Christian psychology by which to go about the things of therapy and those sorts of things that I end up doing with my days. So I spend almost 7 or 8 hours a day meeting one-on-one with people, usually one-on-one, talking about all sorts of things that people are going through. So that's my job, that's what I do. Now some of you may be slightly concerned about having a psychologist speak at church. There was a day when I would have been a little concerned about that. In fact, I went back to my Oregon State days when I was a brand new Christian and I took some psychology courses. I thought it was horrible. I thought it was so anti-Christian. Like, I used to say, I think psychology is just a longer version of the word sin. You know, it's that bad. You know, and I thought, you know, because what I ran into was a thing called behaviorism where they think there's nothing inside you, you're a blank slate, and all we are is a responses to rewards and punishments, and that's the reason you do every single thing you do. So I just didn't believe that at all. It seemed very contrary to the Bible, and so I was really against it. But then I went through my own need for therapy, my own issues, and I ended up running into some Christian psychologists who were very, very different than that. Some of the greatest people I've ever met in my life, and I realized there's a different type of psychology, one where Jesus is the answer, where the relationship with God is the key. This is my lovely wife, Kathy, trying to help me with something, I'm sure. Okay, she's going to tape my mic. It's going up and down as I'm talking? Okay, that's pretty funny. I have these funny mic things. Actually, I should say one other thing is before the singing started, I accidentally had the mic on, and I was singing just some other song, and Kathy's over here going, Scott, Scott, because my voice is coming out. And what's strange, I'm glad she did that because a little later I went to the bathroom and during the singing, and who knows what we would have heard. So that's like a comedy movie, right? That's But I have really appreciated this church very much. Been here almost 2 years. I have not felt this good about a church in many, many years. One of the the first things I noticed was how well the pastors treated my wife, Kathy, with her music ministry. And that just means an incredible amount to me. Seth, in particular, treated her tremendously well. And all the things afterwards, Dave's teaching, and really, it's all of you guys growing on me, to be honest with you. And I've really enjoyed the chance. My class, I just get a thrill to teach it every Sunday morning and talk about family with people. So I'm really, really glad to be here. Well, what I want to do is talk a little bit about fear today. Fear is the starting point of what we're going to talk about. But before we do, I want to tell you a story about fear in my life. This happened, this is the most terrifying moment of my childhood. I believe I would say this is the most terrifying moment in my childhood. It happened while I got in a car wreck behind the wheel, my first car wreck behind the wheel, and I was 5 years old. So this is what happened. My family's always played a lot of golf and played competitive golf, and when I was 5 years old and my little sister Susie had just turned 3, we drove up to the country club, and my parents went in. They want to check on some scores. They want to go up and see who's winning the golf tournament, the local golf tournament. They left us in the car, me and Susie in the car. And back in those days, you could trust a little more, and it wasn't so outlandish. You'd probably never do that today, but back then it was more common. So we're in the car. My parents go in. They're probably only gone 5 or 10 minutes. But I immediately get behind the wheel, going, playing car like you'd always do. Now, I don't know which one of us did it. I really want to blame my sister, but it was probably me. Took off the emergency brake. And I'd really like to blame my sister, but it's probably me. Took it out of park and into neutral. And back then, you didn't need the keys in the car to change gears. And it was on quite an incline, and we started to move. Now, I'm 5 years old, and I'm feeling it move, and I look up, and I see things moving through the windshield. Okay, so I'm terrified, but no, that is not the most terrifying moment of my childhood. I thought to myself, I'm 5 years old, but I knew the brake stops the car. That's about all I knew about driving. So I reached down underneath, and I remember the steering wheel being right here, and I'm pushing just as hard as I possibly can on that brake. But it's hard to move it. It's hardly moving in at all. Power brakes when there's no power. Little 5-year-old, I just couldn't, and it kept moving. I could feel it keep moving. This isn't working. But no, that wasn't the most terrifying moment of my childhood. Then I heard it hit something, kong, and then hit another thing, kong, and I knew something really bad had happened. But no, that wasn't the most terrifying moment of my childhood. The next thing I know, there's adults coming into the car, taking my sister and I away, hugging us, and so here I am being handled by strangers I don't know, which you're not supposed to do when you're 5. So I was terrified of the adults here, but no, that was not the most terrifying moment of my childhood. My sister starts screaming, "My mom's going to kill us, my mom's going to kill us, my mom's going to kill us." And this lady is next to her saying, "Oh, no, she won't. Oh, no, she won't." I looked at her and said, "You do not know my mom." This was the beginning of the most terrifying moment. I was saying to people, this is it. Take a good look. We're not going to be here tomorrow. This is it. Because it's over. It's over. I knew it was over. Absolutely knew it was over. So then I saw my mom coming from a distance, and the panic ensued. Well, the result of it is, obviously, I was not killed, or I probably wouldn't be here in front of you. But what did happen was my 6th birthday was not celebrated in any way. I didn't even get a happy birthday, no party. My mom was trying so hard to make me never do that again. And it worked. I never did do that again, and the consequence was huge. But that's, fear. Fear is a very big thing, and that was what I was feeling that day. Fear affects all of us. When I work in therapy with people, I see fear dominating people's lives. I see fear dominating Christians' lives. They're afraid to take steps they know they need to take, they know are right and healthy, and they're terrified and they're frozen. And we all have to deal with it. Sometimes we have the fear of rejection, the fear of being alone, the fear of failure, fear of the future, fear of disease, fear of death. And here's one that's come up a lot lately: fear of judgment from other people in the church. Terrified to act in a way that is going to cause me to be looked down upon by other Christians. So fear is a very powerful thing. It was powerful in my own family's life. Some people try to use fear to their benefit, and that's what my family, I'm kind of an expert on fear, in the bad way. I mean, I know way too much about it. My grandfather was a top chauffeur for the country of Canada. He actually chauffeured John F. Kennedy, Kate Smith, Greta Garbo. He has some funny stories about Greta Garbo. And but he was a top-rate chauffeur. One of the reasons he was so good was because he was so obsessive and fearful. There's a story about him driving his car, the limousine, about 15 feet, and it got too much dust on it. He was afraid it would be seen and he'd be looked down on. He drove it back in and re-dusted it. He was obsessive out of fear. It seemed to help him be successful, but it tore him up inside. My dad, a very good salesman. He sold pharmaceutical products. By the way, when I was about 10 years old in 1969 or 1970, the school teacher asked us all, what does your daddy do? What do your parents do? So I said, my dad sells drugs. Which in those days was especially, not really the thing to say. And I quickly learned the phrase, a distributor of pharmaceutical products. Though I still thought I sold drugs, as far as I could tell. But he sold pharmaceutical drugs to hospitals and to doctors and things like that. The teachers. Yeah. So, okay, I'll try to get past that one. But he sold to doctors and hospitals, and so he was trying to. But he was always so worried about being fired. Now I saw the list. They had a list of like 40 or so of the salesmen on the West Coast for the company he worked for. He was always in the top 3. Every single one I saw, he was first, second, or third. But he was always afraid he was about to be fired. And so he worked and strained, a fear of not being fired. He came from the Depression, and things were different, and he just was always afraid of that. So he used fear to propel him. So then we come to me. Now, I had a 3.8 GPA in high school. I was in the top 5% of my class. But every quarter, I would come out to my parents in the middle and go, Mom and Dad, I'm flunking. And they'd go, what are you talking about? You never come close to flunking. Mom and Dad, if I get zeros on everything from here on out, I'll get all Fs. Not just Fs on everything, getting zeros on everything. I would scare myself, fearing failure, to get myself to go back in that room and keep studying. I used fear to try to propel myself to succeed. But it tore me up. It tore my dad up. It tore my grandfather up. And so in your little bulletins for my little thing there, it says fear is, and the phrase is bad fuel. It's horrible fuel to run on. It tears up the engine. It's not something to live your life by. To try to avoid things we're afraid of. But avoiding things we're afraid of is probably the reason we make a very large number of our decisions. Not out of love, but out of fear. So what is the answer? What is the remedy for fear? Well, we're going to take a look at 1 John. So go ahead and turn to 1 John 4. It's 1902, page 1902 in your pew Bibles. 1 John 4, it's a very short passage, very commonly known passage. 1 John was a personal letter. It has no opening or closing. It was not a formal letter, it was a personal letter. No one knows who it was written to. There's theories that it might have been written to the church in Rome or Ephesus, but no one really knows for sure. They do know that it was a church that was not in persecution, clearly. And the other thing, what happened to this? It went way down. I think I shouldn't put so much on it. Sorry, I think I put too much on you. It was written between 85 AD and 100 AD. Some people say after 100 AD. You're staying there, aren't you? Okay, good. So it was written later than many books in the Bible, very much later than many books. It was written by John, the one who was loved by Christ, as he called himself. And most of the book has to do with a refute against Gnosticism. Gnosticism was a philosophy that thought that all material things were evil and only spiritual things were good. So they thought about Jesus. They had to say that from the point he was baptized to the point he died on the cross, he wasn't physical. He was purely spiritual. He became the divine Christ, was no longer the human Christ. And that's what they tried to say because they just could not conceive of anything material being good. They really couldn't buy the incarnation, that God had really become one of us, and couldn't put the two together. Now that becomes really important later, which you'll see. But that's what it's about. That's what he's refuting through this. So let's read 1 John 4. It's 16. I'm going to stop at 18 right now, and we'll do 19 at the end. And so we know and rely on the love God has for us. God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God, and God in him. In this way, love is made complete among us, so that we have confidence on the day of judgment, because in this world we are like him. There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. So, the remedy, and this is in your bulletin too, the remedy for fear is love, because it does not fear consequences. So, love is a major part of the Bible. It's probably, next to God, the absolutely most central concept throughout Scripture. It has to do with the first and greatest commandment. When Jesus was asked that, the first and greatest commandment is to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. The second that's like it is to love your neighbor. So love is central. There's a whole chapter on it. 1 Corinthians 13 goes into great detail on one concept. It's very rare that happens, that much time given to it. And here we just read one of the most amazing 3 words I've ever heard. God is love. Many of us doubt that. Now, sometimes I think if you were to come up with a ratio between the strongest man in the world and how strong God is, what is the ratio between those two? Pretty much infinite to 1, right? I mean, not 3 to 1 or 4 to 1. It's infinite. No man is even on the ballpark with that. How about in terms of knowing everything? Knowledge. Where is God compared to the smartest man on the planet? Smartest human? Not even close, right? How about love? Do we keep the same ratio? I think for a lot of us, it's more like a 2 to 1 ratio. Something not that different than humans, when with other attributes are incredibly different. But we don't put love in that category. We think that maybe God loves us a little more than others, but it's radically different. So love is a central thing. To me, there's 2 ways in which love overcomes fear. One is when you feel loved. If you feel completely safe and loved, why would you fear the person who's loving you? If you really believed you were loved, you would not have any trouble trusting them. You know they would have your best interest at heart, and you know that they would not harm you. You could rest easy. There would be no need for fear. The other way that love overcomes fear is when we are feeling it. For instance, I had this little kind of daydream nightmare when years ago when my kids were little. I have 2 sons, Sam and Tim. When they were little, I had this fear, we lived in the mountains then, of Oregon, that a mountain lion would jump through the window of their bedroom. Now, that's never going to happen, right? But it just was a fear that came to me. I had this thought that a mountain lion would jump through there, smash it in, they would be in their beds, and a mountain lion would be in their room. So I thought, what am I going to do? Well, this is what I came to for a plan. I'd hear the smashing of the windows. I'd go running in, and I'd see the mountain lion. I'd yell at my kids to get out and close the door. And then I would look at that cat and run right at it and drive my shoulder into it and pin it against the wall. And I would pin it there for as long as it took until they were out and the door closed, and then I would figure out about what I was going to do. But what I'm getting at is I would not be afraid of that mountain lion. Out of love for my kids, I would not have the slightest hesitation, the slightest ability to do it, because I would love that much. Kathy and I have a plan that if we get confronted by someone who, like in a dark alley in some bad part of town, which should never happen, but if it does, what we're going to do. If it looks dangerous, the plan is she runs, I tackle. I tackle the guy. I don't know if I'll take him down. I don't know if I'll hold him down, but she runs and she doesn't help me. She just gets out. Run as fast as you can. Don't jump on his back and pound him. Just get out. And once you're safe and free, then you call and try to help me. But I would not be afraid of that man. Now, if it was just me, I'd be afraid. And I'd be terrified of a mountain lion by myself. But when someone I love is in danger, no fear. That's what love does. So those are two ways, at least, in which love can overcome fear. Both of those have to do with the Christian life. So love is good fuel. That's another part of your bulletin. Love is good fuel. It has never-ending motivation to positively help somebody. Love is very good fuel. One of the biggest change points in my life was when I gave up living by fear and said, you know what, I'm not going to be afraid anymore. I'm going to just love. I'm going to let love be the way that I guide my life. Now, this next part, so far what I think what I've said, you've probably heard something like it before. You know that love is good. You know that fear is something that's hard on us and difficult for us. But the thing I think that I really want to get through today, more than anything else, is this next question, which is, how do we feel loved? We all know we're supposed to. How? I've heard multiple sermons, hundreds maybe sermons. Love God. God loves you. But I still look around, and a lot of us are so insecure where it hasn't really hit home enough to make us rest, to where we're okay. We don't need to strain. So many Christians I work with in therapy feel so guilty and so fearful, and that's what's driving them to do so many things. A friend of ours the other day, doesn't go to this church, said that in heaven she thinks she's going to be cleaning toilets. That she's going to be cleaning toilets in heaven. That's just not what I think goes on in heaven. I don't think we're going to be cleaning. I don't think there's going to be a need like that. But she had this view where she's still kind of going to be punished even in heaven. Rather than we get to be in God's presence and how wonderful it's going to be with him. So a lot of us really struggle with feeling loved. Now, partially that's because people around us, maybe our parents, maybe other people, have not done a good job loving us, and it's really hard to buy that God could be that different than the people around us. Sometimes those sort of things. Sometimes it's Christians. We've been around Christians, and some Christians have not treated us well. That can be a big reason why. To me, one of the things I do in my mind is there's Christians and there's Christ. And even though the Christians are following Christ, we are far, far cry from him. His love is perfect. If we try to place that on Christians, on each other, we cannot bear that weight. We're all struggling, trying to love him. But if you look at a Christian and they fail you, that's a human. That's a sinner. We're still sinners. We're still struggling. I often say this in marriage classes I teach. You did realize you married a sinner. I mean, you chose to marry a sinner. You're going to get sin sometimes. There's going to be struggles to believe. But sometimes we try to place too much weight on Christians and not enough on Christ directly. The next thing in there, which I really want to point out, you cannot love until you feel loved. It is impossible for us to love if we don't feel loved. We can try to fake it. We know we should. We try to. But if you just don't really feel loved, we can't pull it off. We can't. We have to feel loved. The next one in the bulletin, you will never feel loved by a thing. A thing. Sometimes we look at God as a thing, not as a person. Someone who can really love us. He's God. He's all powerful. He keeps the universe going. But loving us, a person, it doesn't register the same way. But you can't feel loved by a thing. To feel love requires a relationship. That's the next one in the bulletin. It requires a relationship. Now, all the time, you've heard this whole thing about Jesus is to have a personal relationship with God. That's why we were created. That's why Jesus died. That's what this is all about. But most of the time, we would struggle to say what we're really having is what we normally would call a relationship. I'll give you an example. When I had been a Christian about 4 or 5 months, in my youth group, they have those silly question things sometimes in the youth groups. Well, they said, Jesus is my blank. Fill in the blank. Jesus is my blank. What's the best word? So people said Jesus is, like some runner said, he is the finish line. Jesus is my violin because I play, with it. Things like that. I said, and I'm kind of embarrassed, but this shows, the difference. I'm playing golf a lot. I said, Jesus is my flagstick. Okay? So that doesn't sound totally unreasonable. It's what I aim for. I'm aiming towards a flagstick. But what kind of relationship do you have with a flagstick? What kind of a relationship with a flagstick? Did we ever look into each other's eyes? Did I ever give a flagstick a hug? Did I really care about what it went through? Did it care about me? No, it's silly. Flagsticks. So when I said that, and a lot of people have that kind of thing, it's like Jesus is a thing. God is a thing. He's not a person. It doesn't feel like a person. So sometimes it's hard. One of the things I've thought a lot about is what a relationship actually is. And we use that word a lot, but what is it really? I was at a Young Life camp, and this is another one of my worst moments in ministry. I got this kid to go to camp, and I was sharing Christ with him during the week. He'd heard about Jesus, and he was really getting the message as well. And at one point he goes, "Scott, are you saying that I can know God?" Now, I knew the answer was supposed to be yes. I'd said yes to that question a billion times. But he asked it differently. He was saying, like the way I know you? I actually said no. Now, I knew it was wrong, but I'd never heard the question that way before. You mean like no, like this? And it was like at that point I realized I don't think I've got a good grasp on what relationship really is, and that I really don't have it that way with God. My relationship is more like the flagstick relationship than a really personal relationship. So from that point on, I've really thought about it. Now, I want you to think about a meaningful relationship to you. Think of maybe the most important relationship to you. The very first time you saw that person, you saw the way they look. You saw their physical makeup. Then you start talking. And into the talking, usually about a minute or two, something changes. And when you look at their eyes, you're no longer just looking at their eyes, you're kind of seeing behind the eyes. You see the person. You're starting to have an actual relationship. And you can tell they're kind of looking at you that way. And that is where a relationship is really beginning to happen. I'm looking into the eyes of somebody, and I can see that they're looking into me. The eyes are the door to the soul. You see the person's soul through the eyes. That's what went on with me and Kathy. We look at each other, and all of a sudden, and everybody I know here, I've gone through that with you. And that's where a relationship happens. Well, a lot of people think, God, it's hard to do that with God because he's not physical. Well, we're not really looking at the physical anyway. We're looking past the eyes. That's what we can do with God and have an actual relationship with him. But most prayer isn't like that. Most of our prayer times are more talking at him, saying things, sometimes for the listeners more than to God. And it's not like we really think he's there. And what I'm trying to really point out is he's a real person. He's a real person, and you can see into his heart, and he can see into ours. One of the questions people ask on their deathbed, a commonly asked question is, did anybody ever really know me? Did anybody ever really know me in this whole life? Knowing and being known is really a critical thing, and that's what this whole thing with Jesus is about. We were created so he could know us and have this actual relationship. Jesus died to take away the barrier so he could know us. And actually, whether you know it or not, he's in this room right now. Right here, right now, in this room. It's not a metaphor. He's really here. And he's ready to have a relationship with you. He can give you attention anytime you need it. He never sleeps. He never gets sick. He doesn't die. He's there all the time for you. If you need love, he's there all the time for you. So that last verse, we love because he first loved us. 1 John 4:19. We love because he first loved us. There was he's right here and now, and sometimes that's hard to register. I ran a little Bible study once. This is, to me, just a hilarious story. I had 6 of these high school kids coming to this Bible study after they'd become Christians, and they were coming every week. And then one day I thought, okay, I want them to see that Jesus is really in the room with them, because he's really in the room with us right